Hello, my name is Michael Green. I'm pastor of Fort Wayne Primitive Baptist Church in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and welcome once again to the Banner of Grace broadcast. Certainly glad to be with you this day and trust that God has blessed you with a wonderful day. Today we have Pastor Jeremy Sarber with us. Jeremy is pastor of Pilgrim's Rest Primitive Baptist Church, sort of northwest of us, and Brother Jeremy is going to be sharing some of the time on this broadcast. And you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good thing. I am 27 years old, if I look young to you, and I've been pastor of Pilgrim's Rest for about 2 years or so now, and preaching just about a year longer than that, and I've just thoroughly enjoyed every moment of it thus far.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to converse with Brother Jeremy before I moved out into the Fort Wayne area, and just a real wonderful person and has a real zeal to serve God's people and a real zeal for the church. And I've had the opportunity to read some of his writings and some of his experiences, and just felt led to have him come and be with us today. And if you want to share a little bit about your experience as far as coming into the church and the family connections with the church and so forth. I'll just turn it over to you and let you go.
Sure thing. Well, I was raised by a primitive Baptist minister who was serving churches long before I was born, and feel very thankful in that regard. And of course, my mother also has been in the Primitive Baptist Church her entire life down in the state of Georgia. And I was raised in the Primitive Baptist Church, did not join till I was about 12, 13 years old. But I was raised in a wonderful home. I was raised to know right and wrong, and I was raised to know God's precious truth. And again, I count my blessings for that. Now, I didn't always remain so faithful from the time I was 12 or 13 on up, I guess around high school and a few years after that. Of course, as a child, I did my fair share of rebellious things, but as I got older, I just got further and further down that worldly path. And of course, as anyone's experienced it, it just leads to a lot of despair and a lot of devastation in your life. And of course, as you start to get down that road and you start to, I guess I could say it all began with, I grew to not care as much about what the Lord might think or what my folks might think or what the church might think, and cared more about what my peers around me thought. And I was holding myself to a very worldly standard. I stopped being concerned about church on Sunday and more concerned about where the party was going to be on Friday night or Saturday night. And I've written my personal testimony and displayed it online before, and I got through about 12 installments of it, and got so discouraged about just thinking about all the things that I have in my past that I did not even get to the best parts of it. And I've learned to shorten the story a little bit as I tell it, and I don't think all of the details are necessary, because most of God's people have experienced those things in their life and come to a point. I like the way David put it, and I think it's the 32nd Psalm, when he described that when he kept silent, his bones waxed old, and when he had yet to confess his sins, and when he had yet to profess the Lord and to return unto Him through his sins, it wore on him. And that was really my experience, because as I said, I was raised to know the truth. I was raised to know better. And the farther away I tried to run from the church, it was kind of a double whammy, because the farther I got, the more I wanted to get even further away, because what I found is when you're running from God, you feel like you need to run from His people as well. You need to run from His church. And for me, my entire family is Primitive Baptist. My aunts, my uncles, my parents, my brothers and sisters, and there was a level of guilt just to be around them. Right. And the burden of my own sin really weighed on me, and I can remember several occasions where I was in despair, but I was trying to cover it up with entertainment and things of the world. But the truth is, when you turn off the lights at night to lay down to go to sleep, and all of that entertainment is stripped away from you, you're left with nothing but emptiness to a great extent. And I remember several times thinking to myself, I know the Lord's watching me, but I just have to shake that feeling that He is so I can continue doing these things that I'm doing. And it got to a point, I say I was about 22, 23, and I was living with a friend of mine here in North Indiana, and we lived our lives as we had so many years before, but more and more I knew that I was not happy, and it really came to light one day when one of my sisters, actually, we were just sitting down having a casual conversation like we had many times before, and she looked at me in the eyes and she asked me, she says, "When is the last time you've been happy?" And I laughed it off and I said, "Well, what do you mean? Of course I'm happy." And she said, no, you smile and you laugh and you joke. She goes, "But I haven't seen you happy in a really long time." And I didn't have an answer for her because I knew she was right. I knew it weighed on my soul for quite some time before that, and it just got heavier and heavier. And it wasn't too long after that it was in the night. I was at my apartment. My roommate was gone. The lights were off. I was getting ready for bed, and it hit me all at once. And I don't think I've ever had a prayer quite like I had that night. And it was literally like I could feel the burden of my own sins and the life I was living right on my shoulders. Right. And I fell to my knees, and I probably had not prayed in honestly years to that point. Yeah. And I remember repeating the words over and over again during that prayer, "Lord, I surrender. I can't do it anymore. I know your way's best." And I knew it all along. Right. And I'll tell you, it was just, all that weight was just immediately lifted off, and I felt so much better. Now, I spent so long away from the church that I was fairly rough around the edges at that point. Right. And so it took me a while, and to be honest with you, I spent quite a bit of time in study after that. My roommate thought I was crazy. He didn't understand why in the world I had this sudden interest in the Bible, but I vowed that, I'm doing it the Lord's way, and now I got to figure out what the Lord's way is. Right. And so I began to study, and I studied quite a bit. And to be honest with you, even at that point, I still had a level of rebellion in me because my father and my mother and most of my family being Primitive Baptist, and generally Primitive Baptist, not in all cases, but they're small country churches, very quaint and very simplistic in their worship service, and just a blessing to be a part of. But at that time, I was convinced that there is no way these small little country churches have it all together. I began to realize the significant difference between a lot of contemporary church services and the Primitive Baptists in both doctrine and practice, and I began to study those things out. And as I studied those things out, basically I had the beliefs of the Primitive Baptist in one hand, I had the Bible in the other hand, and I thought, I'm going to go down the list and I'm going to disprove as many of these as I possibly can. Right. And as I got deeper and deeper into it, I come to realize I started checking them off one by one, going, well, okay, that one's true. I think that one's true. And then the next one, I think that one's true. And then you get to some of the harder ones, and you say, well, this is going to take me more time. But eventually, I came to a point where I believed what the Primitive Baptists believe, and that is really when I truly came to embrace the Primitive Baptists once again, and even more so than I ever did when I first joined the church at 12 or 13. Right. And it's just been a blessing to me ever since.
Yeah. That's the amazing thing to me. Amazing thing about the truth is it's always the truth. I remember reading one time the federal government, when they train their agents to determine which money is real and which money is counterfeit, they instruct the person on all the nuances of the original. And that's a wonderful blessing. The truth is always the truth. And your story reminds me a lot of my story, and probably everybody's story, of the prodigal son. All of us have times where we have left our father's house and spent our inheritance, but I'm thankful that God, through His Spirit, convicts us, and we do come to the end of ourselves and understand that things are far better in the Father's house. And I'm thankful that our Heavenly Father is like the Father in the story Jesus told, and He welcomes us back with open arms.